Good evening. I'm Rudy Al-Khoury, of the School of Architecture. Thank you for joining us tonight for the first in the Spring Salon series. This was orchestrated by our colleague, Professor Sonia Chow, as one of the initiatives she took on when she assumed her role as the Associate Dean of Research. Other projects include the new research newsletter, also a revamped website that showcases the research projects by students and faculty at the school. So all of this is intended to promote the culture of research, generate a discussion around research projects, and also stimulate the social activities with this salon at the school that have, of course, been curtailed by the pandemic. So we are delighted. This is one of the first in-person events at this scale we are hosting here, so it's quite exciting. So this year, the Salon, which happens every Thursday in February, is putting the spotlight on the different programs and the disciplines, respective disciplines, and the research in those areas. Next year, actually, we will be showcasing the labs and more focused on the current projects in those labs at the school. And many people here were involved in staging this. As you know, especially during the pandemic, these are complex logistical undertakings. So I would like to thank our IT team, Ray and Robert, for putting this together, our communications team, including especially our new communications expert, Karina Shadid. Where is Karina? Thank you for promoting this. The staff of the school and academic services and the Dean's office, thank you all for helping us with this event. And now I'm going to turn to Sonia, who's going to tell you more about the event.
Thank you all for coming and joining us for this inaugural Spring Term Salon at the School of Architecture. Clearly, our wonderful South Florida weather and this great backdrop make possible what other universities can't do during this time of the year, which is to come together in this very safe environment, COVID related, and allow us to really celebrate the research of our faculty and of our students. We thought it would be appropriate to start this salon series with our oldest program here at the School of Architecture. The program that many of you who may have been here before would remember it as the Suburban and Town Planning Program. And since, a few years, maybe a decade ago, right, Liz? It became the Masters of Urban Design. The program was, of course, launched by Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk in connection with several other faculty members, which you will see up here today, including Jaime Correa, who was one of the program's longest-running directors for nearly 20 years, was that? And so we will be able to hear from all of these wonderful faculty members and some ex-students of the program their experiences related to research and to courses, and where they think that, of course, the profession has been, where it is today, and where it's going into the future. So before we get started, I need to start by introducing our curator for this evening, someone who probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to go through that exercise anyway with a very abbreviated introduction. She deserves much more. Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk is, of course, the Malcolm Matheson Distinguished Professor of Architecture and has a joint appointment with the Department of Public Health and Sciences, or Health Sciences at the Miller School of Medicine. She was, of course, Dean of our School of Architecture between 1995 and 2013, and she teaches various courses focused on urban design. Liz's publications include refereed journals, as well, journal articles, I should say, and book chapters. She is the co-author of Suburban Nation, The Rise of Sprawl and the Decline of the American Dream, and of The New Civic Art, Elements of Town Planning. On the creative work side, Liz and her partners at DPZ Partners have received numerous awards and recognitions, including honorary degrees, Architectural Records First Women in Architecture Award, and the Richard H. Dreyfuss Prize for Classical Architecture. Liz has served on numerous review and editorial panels, including the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts. So we hope that you will enjoy this discussion today. The panelists, if you can, start joining us up here at this sort of pseudo stage that we have, and that way we can ask you to all introduce yourselves, and we can get this program started. We will ask you all to please linger afterwards. The purpose of this is for you all to make connections and sometimes reconnections, right? Because we may not have seen each other in a while. And to use the questions that will be posed here today as an opportunity to think beyond and think about the topics a little bit further. We also encourage you to talk to the panelists directly about their opinions, and that way we can all sort of grow together. So without further ado, Liz, take it from here.
Could we ask the panelists to join us? This is a large group, and we're going to try to move pretty quickly. Veruska, come on up. I think we have a seat for you. So I'll start with some thank yous also to the Dean, Sonia, for initiating and organizing this, Maddie Lee, who's very good at making sure we all do what we're supposed to do, Isabella, who's will be advancing the slides, but not yet, and of course Ray and Robert, who are making sure that we're seen and heard. Yes, I should be wearing bifocals by now. Urban design is the underpinning of all of our teaching at the School of Architecture. As Sonia pointed out, it was our first master's program. It was the first expansion of our offerings beyond the Bachelor of Architecture, and it was called the Master of Architecture in Suburb and Town Design back then. And therefore, there should be many more faculty up here with us, because in fact, most of your faculty in some way or another, intellectually, academically, professionally, trade in this topic. But the people I invited to be with us and before you this evening have been teaching the Master of Urban Design program courses in the most recent years. And each one of them has been asked to present one or two ideas about the importance and power of urban design as the physical context for human interaction. So as the background for architecture, as the background for landscape architecture, as an important component of real estate development, and a very important component for ensuring both sustainability and resilience in the built and natural environments. The slides will be background, showing student work, faculty research, publications, and practice. And it's important to note, if you can ever read any of what will be on the slides, there are many collaborations among these and other faculty, as well as working with students. So I hope you will come away from this seeing that this is a very varied and can be very intense kind of activity for a designer or a developer, and that it has the power, among other things, to make people happy. So could we start the slides, please? And Chuck, you'll be first.
Okay.
And then-
Thanks, Liz. And nice to see people in person. Liz, of course, asked me to speak first because she thought I would have the most important things to say, the deepest thoughts. Of course, then I looked at the list and realized it's alphabetical. So here's my yesterday, today, and tomorrow. You'll see my yesterday and my tomorrow are the same place in Aix-en-Provence. And you know, part of the idea is that great urban design creates timeless places. The today were the little kiosks of how we've been contending with the pandemic currently. And then you'll see a bonus slide talking about the culture of good placemaking. You know, I guess the thing I'll emphasize in my remarks, given my role here over 20 years, Sonia's telling me, make the feedback higher, or get closer. Okay, so the thing I'll emphasize, kind of what I've been doing all along here, is to be involved in interdisciplinary work. So both with the night program and community building, first 8 years or so I was here, and since the Master of Real Estate Development and Urbanism was created, these programs have always been connected to the urban design side of the school, and more and more now, all of the programs in the school: architecture, urban design, construction management. And I think that this is what's important about urban design today and going forward. When I was going to school for planning, there was resistance to the notion of urban design, especially physical planning, and the critique was it's just being treated as large-scale architecture by the architects, this urban design stuff. And I think today the most important kind of underpinning of urban design is how interdisciplinary it is, how much it's informed by all different disciplines. And then at the end of the day, it is about the shaping of the physical environment. So, you know, this week, just yesterday, I'm on a ULI placemaking council, and it was online, and one of our presenters was Robin Mosel, and her company's called Of Place. And her presentation, they got 15 minutes. She's a designer and architect. The first half of it was all about their process, involving market analysis, the use of data and studies, SWOT analysis. And I was really struck by that. I actually sent it to the dean and to Jaime. I said, this would be great to have an architect who comes and talks about how to use this information to inform the process of urban design. So in the school, the things that happen on this interdisciplinary basis with urban design, the Heinz competition, which Veruska and Joanna have been leading in studio for several years, that involves students from all different programs. You have to have 3 different disciplines, 3 different programs in the 5 students in each team. We have a large capstone that includes all of the programs in the school, students and faculty, which most of the faculty up here have been involved in, and Jaime's been involved in for many years. We have courses that students from all programs, in my courses, the development program. We've always had urban design students. Now we have architecture, urban design, construction management. We have business students, law students, and they all work on projects together, team projects. And I could go on. But I think it's a great time. Yeah, that's a great time it's a great time to be here and enjoy the interdisciplinary part. One last thing on the future of urban design. Yeah. You know, the program used to be called not suburban, but suburb and town design. Well, there's so much movement into the suburbs again, I think we have to turn our attention back. We'll have to change it back.
So we have to rename it. Thank you, Chuck, for starting us off. Jaime, I wonder if you would pick up on that, something important and powerful.
So, am I on?
Get close. Just get close.
Okay. So, so I want to ask forgiveness because what I'm about to explain is rather autobiographical, shallow, and extremely pedestrian. I would have loved to tell you about how the program evolved, how it became what it was during my tenure as director, and how this program influenced the other programs in our school in ways that were totally different and unpredictable since the inaugural moment in 1989. Nevertheless, I only have 3 to 5 minutes. So I'm going to tell you a story that to me has been essential in the development of my career choices. When I was 10 years old, my father gave me 3 theory books to celebrate my birthday. These 3 books had the city as the focus. From a very early age, he thought that I was going to be a great medical doctor. But unfortunately, he saw that I was not interested in that at all, that science was not my thing, and that as much as he wanted, all I was interested in was cities and architecture. So he decided that in order to please me, 3 books about cities will make the best present for my 10th birthday. So the 3 books were Death and Life of Great American Cities, published by Jane Jacobs around 1961. And yes, the book was in English. I had no idea of English, the English language. So I had this book and I was unable to read it. Second book was called El Paisaje Urbano by Gordon Collin, also from 1961. This was the Spanish language version of the concise townscape. And the third was written in Italian and was called L'Architettura della Città by Aldo Rossi from 1966. And yes, I read the original version in Italian in the same year that Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. So the book was later translated into English in the late 1970s under the title The Architecture of the City. These 3 documents, now classical readings for anyone involved in the history of cities, gave me 3 ideas which have been pervasive during the course of my career. From Aldo Rossi, I took the idea that there is a clear relationship between cities and architecture, that in the words of Aristotle, nothing comes from nothing, and finally that every geographic location responds differently to the idea of architecture, concept that he introduces in his book under the Platonic ideal of the notion of form, for which he uses a more deliberate term borrowed from Quatremer de Quincy, Jesuit priest who used to teach at l'École Polytechnique in Paris, and the term he used there was type, a term that became the method for the classification of architecture in this school as a point of departure for the production of contemporary architecture. From Gordon Collin, I learned about the phenomenology of cities. As you know, this is a book about pictures and captions, but as simpler as it sounds, it is a fundamental book about the sensorial experience of cities and architecture. It's about a book about human engagement. It's a book about the horizontal plane, the vertical plane, the sky. In other words, it's a book about space, about successful paradigms of a spatial composition and their implications at an experiential level in our daily lives. And from Jacobs, I figured that the so-called planning of cities had halted the natural progress of urban evolution and that it was creating sterile environments for the sake of rational and economic decisions affecting our societies at the core. It's good to remind you that the urban design profession was officially started in the United States 6 or 7 years prior to the publication of her book at Harvard University under the leadership of Jose Luis Sert. In her book, she talks about the importance of many things, the importance of sidewalks, the importance of children on the streets, the importance of windows, etc. But it is the last chapter, the one that called my attention, and it's a chapter about complexity. Complexity of cities resulting from the sum of the parts. No? People taking simultaneous decisions for their own sake to make something more than what those individual decisions were. To me, this was the most transformative concept, and for the very first time in my life, I heard the notion that cities are, in cities, the sum is always larger than the parts. Obviously, these 3 books became the best birthday present of my life. But because, before I finish, I also want to tell you about 2 other books that I read in graduate school. And those were Houses, Palaces, and Cities by Leon Creer, a book which clarified the scope of my professional practice, and a book which gave me a precise methodology to critique contemporary situations and to produce implementable operations in both cities and countryside, suburbs and towns, which was what we were teaching between 1989 and 2014 in this school. And the second book was The Limits of Growth by Donella Meadows from MIT, a book that was published in 1972 to support the ideals of something that was called the Club of Rome. This was a fundamental book because it allowed me to understand that our planet has limited resources, and in effect that the planet might survive without humans, but humans may not be able to survive without a healthy environment. So these last 2 books, of course, had unexpected influences in my professional career. Because I made a personal commitment to master the literature of urban design, to help everyone in this planet, to make everyone happy, and to transform the urban culture that is decaying and destroying our planet, the most obvious and logical environment for an effective implementation of these ideas was the School of Architecture, this academic environment. So when I was offered the choice between continuing with a very successful professional practice or the choice of living a life of academic modesty at the University of Miami, of course, I chose the latter. It is here where I have had an opportunity to influence more than 1,000 people to become leaders that can affect change all over the world. And it is here where the next generation will learn that through resiliency and effective environmental ideas, we will be able to succeed. Resiliency and environmental health are the 2 most fundamental challenges for the future of urban design, and the 2 issues that should consume our daily lives every day from now on. So I always tell people when they critique the fact that we're teaching urban design principles in an architecture program, which I believe, I mean, you don't understand how many people there are in this world that critique this. I always tell them, urban design might be dead, but long live urban design. So thank you, Liz, for inviting me. Thank you, Sonia, for putting this together, and thank you, Dean El-Huri, for supporting this idea. And finally, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. Again, my name is Jaime Correa. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaime. So, hard act to follow. I don't think we need to be, you don't need to be biographical unless you want to be. Steve Fett, would you like to follow?
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Liz, for moderating. And thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit. Wow. Okay, we can pass this. Urban design is easy compared to the technology associated with this. When asked to come and join the conversation tonight, and when Liz requested a couple of projects to be sent and shown, I thought about what I could share with a group of distinguished colleagues such as these. And the 2 projects that I selected, in a way, at least in my mind, emphasize the vast range and the sort of power that urban design and a knowledge of urban design could provide for very different clients. One project that we worked on in the Center for Urban and Community Design, which is our outreach arm here at the School of Architecture, was a project in Haiti, very much humanitarian-based, in collaboration with a number of great philanthropic organizations such as the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and a kind of cross-disciplinary study with other schools, other universities around the country, including namely the State University of New York. And what that project taught me, or emphasized to me, and why I wanted to share it, was that in addition to being cross-disciplinary, it showed the sort of power of community engagement, where, let's say, trained and educated architects could enter an environment completely different from what we're used to, that being Haiti. And Joanna, of course, knows this very well, as the sort of introduction to Haiti has been a part of the school's sort of legacy, I would say, for many, many years. And through this engagement, through meeting with public, going through these public processes, and really empowering local citizens, a plan emerged that was really, as we would say, a kind of citizens plan, and provided, a sort of need, and fostered a sort of, optimism in the area. And that, on the one hand, is sort of explicitly understood through design, through engagement, and through urban design. And the other project that I wanted to show was a code, which is something that our office did in Margate, Florida, which took a very sort of prototypical suburban condition and introduced new methods of retrofit into an area that was otherwise dominated by the automobile. And what we find today is that communities are sort of starved for things to do, places to go. And a lot of the going is by foot. And what we see with these sort of suburban communities is a sort of desire to retrofit in a certain way, to be a little bit more pedestrian friendly. And it's not always so easy. And so by writing a code, we begin to interface and engage with, again, members of the public into a kind of palatable, acceptable approach to retrofit. And so both of these projects in a way are rooted in engagement with a local population, whether it be in Haiti or in otherwise. And so the scope of the architect, really, and the scale that one engages as an architect, could be at the scale of a fine detail. It could be at the scale of a city, and within the realm of urban design, it could and does, in fact, depend upon communication, relationships, and fostering and championing others to really take pride in the places that they live. And we become the kind of vessels to allow that type of activity to occur.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Next, Joanna, would you be next? I'm asking whether you would go next.
Yeah, I know. Okay, sure. Well, I was just going to be really short, and I figured I'd be at the end and could talk for like 2 seconds.
So the audience should know that the panel did not know ahead of time in what order they would be asked to speak.
Okay, so I think I'm here partly because Veruska and I have taught a number of urban design studios, and I would just say really quickly that years ago, Liz and I were wondering, as New Urbanism was launching, like, how do we know any of this stuff is true or real? Architects have lots of theories, but how do you know they're not just like made up stuff? Because honestly, we've done a lot of wrecking of the world, so how do we know we're making it better? And that started our team with the Frank Martinez was part of it, and Steve, and Adib, you guys did a lot of the early work in East Havana. And we just started picking up with colleagues in public health to actually, we started doing studies with colleagues in public health to measure the impacts of the built environment on health and well-being. We started with kids and elders, then we advanced to look at many more issues, and so that's really all of those studies and all of that research we wanted to bring back into the studio to inform the work of the studio. And then we looked at like who's the biggest offender for wrecking the world, and aside from some of the commercial entities out there, institutions turn out to make a big mess, particularly healthcare institutions. Hospitals are some of the worst places ever. and they should be the best places. And so that got us into consulting with healthcare systems, and that led to Veruska and me doing a number of work that was essentially health and well-being for communities and health and well-being in terms of could we propose alternatives to the current hospital systems. And then Steve and I connected because of Paul Farmer's work in Haiti, because he was looking at the hospitals in Haiti and how they could really serve health and well-being. So somewhere up there, you'll see the slides, because basically we have a formula for the studio. We've done Heinz at the beginning, which sort of shakes everybody up. It's super intense. Then we do something that's in Miami, in a community where people really do want some help, and we can provide it and use it as a launch point. So, for example, the Wagner Creek workshop, stuff like that. And then we work for an actual client, sometimes a healthcare system, sometimes a developer. But the idea is that students then engage in a project that makes a difference. And I would say if there's anything, it's kind of building on what Steve says, is the idea that we can make a difference, and to learn that you can do that at so many levels, and you can do it with real knowledge so that you know you're making things better and not doing harm. So that's our story.
Thank you. So maybe the next one might be Eric Firley, who teaches some of the required courses in the curriculum.
Yes, good evening. My neighbor promised shallowness, but then disappointed us. So I will try to deliver. Shortness as well. I think part of our occupation as professors is to develop some empathy for our students, hopefully. And that's not always easy. And also for students who might, struggle, who are missing something. So talking about the urban design program and the profession, I think that's something I can very much relate to. Becoming an architect is a very complex endeavor. You have to learn how to build a structure, understand it, create spaces, learn all the tools. So often I think we don't have enough time to look a little bit more to the left and to the right to really understand how the built environment really works and who takes the decisions. Unfortunately, not often the architects, as you know. And I think that urban design is really, the kind of complement to architecture, which helps us to understand, how design relates to other fields. We talk a lot about collaboration, about interdisciplinarity, and we are doing this in architecture. But I think urban design is a profession that had to do this for a long time. We can't just look at form and shape. We have to understand, other issues that, have more background of economy, legal issues, social issues. I did my own master of, city design. Again, I think the point about the terminology by Chuck is maybe something to take on. Maybe we can do better than urban design. But so I did my master of city design in the London School of Economics. And, it was for me really a relief to somehow get out of this very restricted world sometimes of the architect, to have elective by philosophers, to have a professor like Richard Sennett, who is a sociologist. And those are things that we can do as well, that we do. We have a fantastic foundation here through our history of the new urbanism. I had, recently a discussion again about, how Professor Plater-Zyberk was one of the first persons to understand that just looking or designing a master plan would not be enough in order to really change anything. So they created, the Congress for the New Urbanism and other structures, co-created and co-founded them, which would put, pressure on politicians in order to change zoning, in order to have an impact. So that's really what I find is a fantastic complement to architecture as a hardcore profession, with all this kind of aesthetic fetishism that, to a certain extent, it is needed in order to become a good architect. So whoever might not feel, 100% certain, wanting to, does the career and a practice in architecture, I think can find here like a cross point to other disciplines and other fields. So I hope this speaks to some of you.
Thank you, Eric. Veruska, would you pick up on that, please?
So So I wasn't expecting to speak it up, but I was sitting next to Jaime and sitting next to Liz. It brings back memories. I'm the product of the suburban town design. And I remember, I remember the first semester was Jaime, and he brought Camilo Cite. And that opened my eyes that cities and spaces make great urban unity. So from that, I was exposed to Joe Nash and Jane Jacobs, and then I think Steve, you're too the product of our school. We practice, but we have to understand that buildings belong to an urban fabric, and the urban fabric belongs to nature. And then Joanna taught me landscape, it's formation, architecture is form. And both of them and the city, they have to come together. So, of course, we can talk hours about our classes and what we taught and how we move with the program, but I think the best thing to say is that we are a little family that we grew together, and we keep feeding, more knowledge, and we try to combine our forces to bring back to you guys. And I do highly recommend, take the Heinz, take Liz's courses, take Jaime's courses, Steve. And I think this is what makes our school so special than other schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Veruska. So Frank will be the last of the design faculty, and then I hope, Frank, when you're done, that Gilda might end up with an invitation to the world of research in the library. Frank?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Liz, for inviting me and into this wonderful forum, actually. I do think that the comments that have been shared so far, the ideas actually that have been shared so far, for me really form the base of knowledge of how I build. And by that I mean both build in an academic sense and what I teach and what we do in practice as well. And so when Liz asked me to participate and to show some of the work, immediately actually, Liz, this is the tiny autobiographical thing back when we had the suburban town design in its infancy and in its early stages. I remember it being so much fun, but often I was asked to teach in one of the studios, and back then we were so fortunate that we had none other than Vincent Scully, the great theoretician and historian, here with us. And again, that forms part of the basis, of the foundation of knowledge. But I remember that we would work so hard in the studio, and I would always ask Vince to come to the final reviews. And I only discovered, they were amazing, and I only discovered many, many years later when he was actually stopping his teaching, that no one asked him to final reviews because he didn't like going to final reviews. So we laughed about it when he told me at a dinner, and he said, but I really had a lot of fun and it was great. And then I went on to tell him how much the students enjoyed that. Now, getting back to this topic, the slides that I submitted, and hopefully you saw them on the screen, actually not last semester, the previous one, spring, last year, we ran a studio that had a combination of students, upper level students, graduates in the MUD program and graduates in the real estate program. And the idea was to embed the real estate students with the design students, and by design I'm including all of those different programs. And we were tackling the notion of affordable housing in the spirit of what you heard today, and really about how can we actually create a built environment that's happy, that's healthy, that is about welfare and so forth. And the sort of, we did a lot of documentation in our, and I'm going to say this in a very simple way, but in our pre-design phase, which involved all kinds of research, and ultimately with the goal of bringing architecture and urbanism together. We approached the project, the 2-block area, first by actually looking at the larger urban area, and then coming up the entire studio with what we thought were 5 viable strategies to do something good, but based on the research. 5 viable strategies that really could provide all of these goals and aspirations that we had set up. So we divided into 5 teams, and one of the teams, which was actually really the MUD students kind of gravitated toward that one, is where we affected the grid. You know, so to some degree, maybe not as cost effective as other strategies, but we want to make sure that there were 5 different big ideas coming out of the studio, and that they were all viable and wonderful, and see if it could fulfill these ideas. And so those are the ones that were on the screen if you got to see them. And the students actually felt that a way of integrating the neighborhood, existing buildings, into the new architecture that was being proposed, along with all the typological studies, was the introduction of a public garden that was really based on the Prado here in Coral Gables, but this was a project in South Miami. And so there was a kind of endless study and critique of the Prado, and really dimensioning it perfectly. And so there was an intensity, I guess, a rigor to the strategy that was wonderful. Now, the students did work on different typologies as well across the 5 teams in the studio. And so the other thing that I submitted was a project that we did many years ago in Boston, which was a townhouse in Boston. And there we started with the urbanism to really understand the architecture and to get down, as Steve was saying, to the level of detail. So for me, that's always been the most important thing about the research, and this is a real project, and obviously it was restoration, reconstruction. But for me, it was the seamless connection between the urban design and the building and the architecture that, for me, at this university, certainly for the last 25, 30 years, has really been incredible, and is really what has led what we do.
Thank you, Frank. Could you pass the microphone to Gilda, please? Gilda has a table of books out.
That's my job, the books. I'm Gilda Santana. I'm the head of the Architecture Research Center, also known as the library. And in the past couple of years, I've gone from shushing to asking people to please wear your mask. But, you know, we're in different times right now. And I guess I'd like to think of myself as wearing many hats within the Architecture Research Center. Primarily, I am there to help you navigate through the various resources that you need to establish a research agenda for yourselves. But also, I want you to think of the library as the place where you can find that one essay or that one book where several of you can sit around and discuss at length, or, you know, whatever. But it dawned on me as we were all sitting here and I'm looking at this screen that a few years ago, I resurrected these VHS tapes of the architect Aldo Rossi lecturing out here. The wind was blowing, and he did not have a screen. He had paper. And he was drawing furiously on this paper and talking as he was drawing and talking to the students. And I just thought, wow, we've come a long way from having to write everything on, you know, a paper to being able to project these images. Same with the digital world has also afforded us a lot of access to materials that in the past only one person could check out one book. Well, now you have a lot of access to electronic books. So I welcome you to take a look at the books that are on the display table because they're all written by faculty, and that's just a sampling, and students as well. And it is my pleasure and an honor to steward the archives for the school. We have the archives of the New Urbanism. I have the School of Architecture archives. And I'm just going to make one last little pitch for those of you who know alumni or become alumni. Please, when you have something related to the School of Architecture that is of historical value for the school, send it my way. Just don't send books. We don't want books. We
Thank
have
you,
them all.
Tilda.
Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I know 3 to 5 minutes was probably optimistic for so many people, but I think we traveled through some interesting ground. There were some names probably that you saw who are not here because they couldn't be with us, but I wanted to include their work as recent teachers. And I don't want to leave out the fact that the person who keeps all this together for the program is Nicole Hijazi, who's at one of the tables at the front of the room. So although we didn't speak to the future as much as maybe we could have, maybe that could come from questions from the audience. And Sonia has a microphone, right? The dean.
I have the microphone. Any questions?
We forgot to ask for shills.
We have one question in the back. A courageous soul, please come forward.
How are you? Thank you all so much for the wonderful presentation. I have a question, a little bit focused on a context that we're all familiar with of Miami. I was just wondering if there was something in particular, one thing, your top priority of what you could do for urban design in Miami for sustainability and resilience moving forward to make sure that Miami continues to be sustainable with a lot of the topics we talked about tonight of walkability, pedestrian focus, water, permeability, health. Well, if there was one thing that you could change as far as either a certain line of code or just something in particular, what would that be that you think would be the one most important thing?
I have a quick answer, but I should let you all go first. You know what? It probably would be something that involves urban design, but is really part of the management as well of the city, and that would be to give dedicated lanes for transit for buses so that there could be more of them moving quickly and make it more pleasant for you to use them and make you want to use them then because they would be going faster than the cars.
Again, I already have, oh sorry. Oh yeah. Yeah, I have the microphone, so I might make I think one example could be, I see two major issues. I mean, you want to really, something very straightforward. We have an issue here with transport. The public transport in this city, I think, definitely needs more development. But even more specifically, urban design related, and definitely Professor Plater-Zyberk could have been speaking about this. Is zoning is definitely a topic that falls into urban design, and I think this city, in order to improve the the probability of affordable housing to emerge, I think is currently in an effort to upzone, so allowing in large parts of this city for a higher density of development with smaller apartments, because the current status quo in many areas forces actually more or less the developers to tear down, for example, small one-family units in order to redevelop the same one-family unit, but only with 3 times or 4 times the same square footage. So we are really creating more and more lack of affordability rather than actually trying to help people who really need it.
So when I hear a question like the one that you just asked, it makes me very uncomfortable because I feel that Miami is like in a state of denial. It is a fact, it is a scientific fact that by the year 2050, the waters are going to rise more or less between 3 and 4 feet, and by the end of the century, the water is going to rise up to 6 or 7 feet. In the studio that Professor Fett and I are doing right now, we're simulating what that means for the city of Miami. And it's dismaying. I mean, vast amounts of real estate are going to be lost because of sea level rise. And if we don't have a plan, in place for that, we're going to be doomed. And the plan is not just to raise the infrastructure, put the houses in pilotis, and et cetera, et cetera. The plan is a lot more severe than that. The plan has to include climate migration. It has to include the fact that people are going to be displaced. And so that's exactly what we're doing in our studio. We're figuring out methods to move vast amounts of population that are going to be displaced by sea level rise into higher lands in the central part of Florida. It is a fact, and it is a fact that it's very negative. Nobody wants to talk about, nor the government, nor us. Faculty hates giving bad news to students, etc. But I'm committed to bring the truth to a studio and to see, because I'm bringing the truth to a studio, to see what options are the options that we indeed have. And I think that that's part of the process of resiliency that the Dean and Sonia are talking about. That new program that Sonia has on resiliency is an important program because the program is basically dealing with that. Yeah. So, I'm sorry that I went on a tangent, but that's how I feel about this future issue for Miami County. We have to recognize that we are number one in terms of asset losses in the world. We are recognized by Climate Central as the number one city in which there will be the greatest amount of asset losses in the world. No? So what are we going to do?
And it's appropriate to bring that up, Jaime, because as I said in my climate adaptation class the other night, those with design training, those of you who are in design fields, are the best equipped to be studying these kinds of scenarios to understand what it is that we can do in the future. Thank you, Jaime. You're talking about the future, which we didn't do earlier. And so our kind of design thinking that you're learning how to practice in the studios and your other courses are very much needed among the management and policy issues and the legal issues that will be part of this picture. But your way of being able to put together complex components or multiple components in complex relationships is precisely what will be needed in the future and what you all are being trained for.
In the city of Miami, we haven't had, taking the question at face value, Miami, Greater Miami, et cetera. If we think of Greater Miami, we really haven't had, since its inception, that kind of vision or thought about placemaking. And it would be amazing. So I'm just taking this at face value and thinking, what is it that I dream about? And, for me, sustainability, resiliency is embedded in that. It has to be a part of it. The real question is that real question of what is sustainable. And so to think about the comments you already heard in a place like Greater Miami, to find to find how you can bring all of the art and science together and actually be able to, and bring all of the players and participants that one could think of. Here's the thing, of a great place. Like, do we have that anywhere in Greater Miami? A great place that we can say, wow, that's an amazing place to go to. And because everything is coming together beautifully, right? The urban space, the buildings, the way that people interact, that it's very social, that it's integrated, that you actually get all kinds of income levels. That we're not talking, all of these other things that I think we need to embrace, and that everyone on this panel and our students actually embrace on a daily basis, I think is, that would be my dream. Like, after all this time and all these, and all this construction and all these cranes, so where's the place? But
maybe just one observation that your question, brings to light in the responses from the panel here. Liz talks about transportation, Eric about affordability, Jaime about science, and Frank kind of summarizes it into a vision. And I think, in a way, like the fact that we're having a conversation about all these topics, a group of architects here having it, is telling again about the sort of diversity and the role that I would, if I could have a wish, it would be that the architect or the urban designer actually has a role to play in all of this. Because I do think that is something that is lacking. Infrastructure happens, and it often happens in a very mundane, non-beautiful way. To imagine that the infrastructure of the city could simultaneously do the work that infrastructure needs to do, collect water, store water, drain water, move people from point A to point B. If design can enter into that equation more and affect the beauty of a place, then I think that would sort of, be the ultimate contribution that we could contribute to.
Okay, the formal part of our program ends here, but please, we encourage you to linger and continue the discussion informally. Also, if you are interested in our graduate programs, please talk to Nicole, and she has information to share with you about this. I remind you that we meet again for the Salon next week. We are preparing it already. It's about the world of construction. And I would like to thank Maddie Lee, who is already orchestrating all of this behind the scenes. She's doing much of the heavy lifting. Thank you very much, Maddie. And hope to see you all next week. Thank you.